Callum Weston was 44 years old, and he had always believed, with the quiet certainty of a man who had spent 2 decades making decisions under pressure, that a good marriage was something you maintained the way you maintained anything worth keeping. Steadily, without drama, by showing up even when showing up was the last thing you felt like doing. He had held that belief through job changes and lean years and the particular exhaustion of middle age. He had held it through the kind of ordinary friction that accumulates in any long partnership. He had held it right up until a Wednesday evening in November, sitting alone at the kitchen table of a house that had started to feel like a waiting room, with a manila envelope from his lawyer sitting open beside his coffee mug. The documents inside were 31 pages. His lawyer had been thorough. The division of assets was already sketched out. The language was neutral, careful, designed to make an irreversible thing feel administrative. He had not signed them. He wasn't entirely sure why. His phone sat face up on the table. No messages. The kitchen smelled like the cedar candle his wife, Adele, lit every evening out of habit, even now, even in the weeks since they had stopped talking to each other in any meaningful way. The candle was still burning on the counter. She had left for her sister's place in Gatineau 3 hours ago, and the candle was still burning. Because Adele Weston was the kind of woman who remembered to blow out candles, and she had not remembered tonight. That detail, small and plainly human, was what made Callum push the envelope aside. He did not know it yet, but by Friday morning he would hear something in a parking garage in downtown Ottawa that would nearly convince him to sign those papers after all. And then, in the same hour, something else that would make him fold them in half and put them somewhere he would not look at them again. Stay with me. Ottawa in November has a way of stripping everything back. The tourists are long gone. The leaves are down. The Rideau Canal is not yet frozen, just dark and still, reflecting the gray sky back at itself. The city moves at a different pace in November, heads down, collars up, people cutting efficiently from one warm place to another without lingering. Callum had lived in Ottawa for 16 years. He knew its rhythms the way he knew his own routines. The particular light on Elgin Street at 7 in the morning, the way the wind funneled between the government buildings on Wellington, the sound the heating system made in the old limestone building where he worked. He was a senior policy analyst at a federal department, the kind of job that looked unremarkable from the outside, and was, in fact, unremarkable from the outside. 12-hour days reviewing frameworks that most Canadians would never know existed and would never need to. The work required a specific kind of patience, the ability to sit with complexity and not demand that it resolve faster than it was capable of resolving. He was, by most accounts, very good at it. His wife was Adele Fortier Weston, 41, a landscape architect with a firm in the Glebe. She designed public spaces, parks, plaza revitalization, the kind of urban work that shows up slowly over years, and then one day you're sitting in a place that feels like it has always been there, and you don't think about the person who imagined it into existence. She had won a provincial award 3 years ago for a waterfront project in Kingston. Callum had gone to the ceremony and felt something he had not known how to articulate at the time. An enormous pride that seemed, somehow, to arrive without a road back to intimacy. They had met at a dinner party in the Glebe, 17 years ago. She had been arguing about green space allocation in new subdivisions, and he had disagreed with her, and they had spent 40 minutes in a corner of the kitchen talking about urban planning and municipal policy, while the dinner went cold on the table, and their mutual friend gave up trying to redirect them toward polite small talk. He had thought, somewhere in that conversation, this is someone worth knowing. For 12 of their 14 years of marriage, he had still believed that. The last 2 had been different, not dramatically different. That was the thing about it. There had been no rupture, no single event he could point to, only the slow accumulation of a particular kind of quiet that replaced the other kind, the easy quiet of 2 people comfortable in the same space. This quiet had edges. It asked questions that neither of them answered. The anniversary dinner they had rescheduled twice and eventually let pass without acknowledgement. The weekend she had suggested in Prince Edward County, for which he had said that sounds good, and then done nothing to actually plan it, and she had not mentioned it again, and neither had he. The conversations that stayed on the surface, logistics, schedules, what needed to be picked up from the pharmacies, because getting beneath the surface required an opening that neither of them had found a way to make. Callum was not a man who talked easily about interior things. He understood this about himself. He had grown up in a household where competence was expressed through action, not language, and he had carried that forward without entirely meaning to. He showed love by doing, by fixing what was broken, by managing the things that needed managing, by being present in a physical, reliable way. He had assumed for longer than was wise that Adele knew this, that she could read the intention beneath the action. He sat at the kitchen table for another hour after she left. The cedar candle burned down. He blew it out and went to bed but did not sleep. The next morning he was in the office by 7:30. By 10 he was running on his third coffee and a draft policy brief he could not concentrate on. His colleague Frederica leaned into his office doorway around 10:15 and asked if he was coming to the team lunch. He said he had a call. He did not have a call. By Thursday afternoon, he had spoken to his lawyer again. The lawyer was careful, practical, kind in the way that lawyers in these situations learn to be. He said, "Take whatever time you need. The documents don't expire." Callum drove home through the tail end of rush hour on the Queensway. The kind of November traffic that moves in long, resentful waves, and thought about the particular cruelty of arriving home to a house that was entirely unchanged. The same furniture, the same framed prints on the hallway wall, one of which Adele had found at an estate sale in Almonte 4 years ago, and which he had always meant to tell her was his favorite. He had never told her. He was not sure why. That had always felt like something that required a moment he hadn't yet identified as the right one. He ate reheated soup for dinner and went to bed at 9:30. Friday morning, he drove downtown for an 8 o'clock meeting in a building near Confederation Square. He was early, as he almost always was. He parked in the underground garage below the office tower and took the elevator up. The meeting ran long. It always did. He was back in the garage by 11:15, walking toward his car, when he heard voices somewhere in the level below, carried up the ramp by the particular acoustic of poured concrete, which does not absorb sound but bounces it in unpredictable directions. He recognized Adele's voice before he recognized the words. He stopped. A man who values privacy does not stand in parking garages listening to his wife's private conversation. Callum knew this, even in that moment, but then he heard that she was crying, not quietly, not composedly, the kind of crying that happens when a person believes no one who matters can hear them. It was the sound of something that had been held in for a long time and was no longer willing to stay contained. He stood very still at the top of the ramp. Her sister Margot's voice came first, low and steady, the voice of a woman who has driven back from Gatineau specifically for this conversation. "Adele, just talk to me." Then, Adele. Her voice was unsteady in a way that Callum had not heard in years. Not since her mother's long illness 3 winters ago, when she had sat in the hospital waiting room for 4 hours while Callum sat beside her, not speaking, not trying to resolve anything, only remaining present because he could not think of a single word that would be adequate and so had offered his presence instead. She had never told him what that had meant to her. He had assumed she was managing the way she always managed, quietly, internally, without requiring much from him. What she said in the parking garage below, in a voice stripped of every carefully maintained surface, turned him completely still. "Callum never makes me feel like a burden," she said. "That's the thing I can never explain to anyone. He never makes me feel like I'm asking for too much. And I have spent the last 2 years punishing him for it, because I couldn't figure out how to tell him that I was the one falling short. The concrete wall was cold under his hand. She kept going. After Mom died, he drove to the house in the middle of the day. He didn't call ahead. He just showed up in his work coat and sat with me at the kitchen table for 3 hours. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to fix it. A pause, ragged at the edges. I never told him that was the most loved I've felt in my adult life. I never told him because I thought if I said it out loud, I'd have to admit how badly I'd been handling everything since. Callum did not move. I started pulling away, Adele continued, her voice dropping lower, because I thought he was. I thought he'd stopped seeing me. He went so quiet. He worked so much. And I thought that meant the effort was finished, that I was no longer something worth directing energy toward. The sound she made then was not quite a laugh. And then I met someone who told me I was wasting myself, that I should want more, that I deserved a larger life. Her sister said carefully. Adele, nothing happened, Adele said quickly and precisely. I need you to understand that. Nothing happened. But I let him into a conversation I should never have opened. A man named Griffin who works 2 floors above my office and who noticed that I was unhappy before I'd fully admitted it to myself. Her voice cracked slightly. He said all the things that sounded like what I needed. And I almost believed that what I was missing was something that wasn't already there. Callum pressed his palm flat against the concrete. He had not heard the name Griffin before. He registered it with the same careful, unemotional efficiency with which he catalogued information that required handling, neither denied nor dwelt upon, set aside for later. What occupied the space where anger might otherwise have lived was something older and more complicated. The slow, leveling grief of a man who realizes that he communicated his commitment entirely in a language his wife could not read. That while he had been showing up, steadily, reliably, in all the ways he knew how to show up, he had never once said out loud, "This is what I'm doing. This is what it means. You are the reason." He had assumed she could see the intention behind the action. He had been wrong about that, and wrong about it for long enough that she had started filling the silence with someone else's words. He walked to his car slowly, sat in it for a few minutes without starting it, and looked at the gray concrete ceiling of the parking garage. Then he started the engine and drove back to the office. That evening he went home and sat at the same kitchen table. The manila envelope was still on the counter, where he had left it 2 days ago. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Adele. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Can I come to Margot's?" he said. A pause, long enough to be meaningful. "It's snowing a bit on the 50, she said finally. "Drive carefully." He drove to Gatineau through light November snow, the kind that dusts the highway without accumulating, the world going quiet and white at the edges. Margot let him in at the door and then, with the particular discretion of an older sister who understands the difference between support and interference, disappeared into the back of the house with the ease of someone who had somewhere she needed to be. Adele was in the sitting room. She was still in her coat. She looked like a woman who had been crying and had finished and was now simply very tired in a way that sleep would not fix. Callum sat in the chair across from her. Not beside her, across. The distance was honest. "I was in the parking garage this morning," he said. She looked at him. The color left her face. "The concrete carries sound," he said. "I wasn't trying to listen. I was walking to my car." He held her gaze. "I heard most of it." She closed her eyes. Her hands were still in her coat pockets. "I need to tell you something before you say anything," Callum said. His voice was level, the way his voice was always level when he was managing something that mattered. "I've had separation papers on my kitchen counter since Tuesday. I haven't signed them. I don't know if I was going to." Adele opened her eyes. They were wet. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "I owe you an explanation that I've been withholding for 2 years without understanding that I was withholding it. I thought I was giving you space. I thought that was what you needed. Every time you went quiet, I backed off because I didn't want to crowd you. I thought I was respecting your process." She exhaled, long and slow. "Every time you backed off," she said, "I read it as confirmation that I'd already lost you." The particular precision of that sentence settled into the room. "I thought you knew," he said. "That's the only defense I have, and I understand it's not sufficient. I thought showing up was enough. I thought you could see what it meant." "Callum," her voice was very quiet, "you have never once in 14 years said the words 'I choose you,' not because it wasn't true. I believe it was true. But a person cannot live inside an assumption forever." He sat with that, did not argue with it, did not soften it, let it stay where it had landed. After a moment he said, "Who is Griffin?" It was not quite a question. He already knew the shape of the answer. He needed her to tell him in her own words. She told him, carefully, with the specific accountability of someone who is too exhausted to perform composure, and has decided, perhaps for the first time in years, to simply be honest. Griffin Holt worked in urban consulting, had appeared at a professional event 8 months ago, and had since made a sustained and deliberate effort to present himself as a corrective to everything she felt she was missing. He had told her she was undervalued. He had told her that the contentment she described was indistinguishable from resignation. He had told her she could have more. "He was telling you that your ordinary life wasn't enough," Callum said. "Yes," she said, "and I was unhappy enough that I let myself hear it. Did any part of you want to believe him?" She looked at him directly. "I wanted to feel seen," she said. "Not by him. I didn't want him. But I wanted someone to notice that I was struggling, and he noticed. And you were managing everything so quietly and so competently that I couldn't tell if you were fine with how things were or simply not looking." Callum nodded. Not in defeat, in understanding that arrives slightly too late and has to be absorbed instead of applied. "I'm going to tell you something I should have told you 8 months ago," he said. "Maybe longer." He paused, organizing the words with the same care he brought to things that mattered. "Last spring, I was asked to lead a cross-departmental initiative, national scope. The kind of file that comes along once in 15 years of this work. I said no." Adele looked at him. "It would have meant 2 weeks a month in different cities for at least a year. Vancouver, Halifax, Calgary. It would have been exactly what I've been building toward professionally." He held her gaze. "We were already disappearing from each other under the same roof. I wasn't willing to see what we'd become with me gone half the time." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than any that had come before it in the last 2 years. "You turned that down," she said. "It was not a question." "Yes, without telling me." "I didn't want it to become something you felt responsible for. I made a decision I could live with." She looked at him the way a person looks at something they had given up expecting to find. Not with relief, it was too complicated for relief. With something more like the quiet shock of discovering that the thing you thought was gone had in fact been present the entire time, expressed in a form you didn't know to look for. "That's not a gift if I don't know about it," she said softly. "That's just another silence." "I know," he said. "I understand that now." Outside, the snow was coming down more steadily. The streetlights in Gatineau made small, bright spheres in the dark. Margot's house was warm and smelled like pine and the particular comfort of somewhere that has been a home for a long time. Adele reached into her bag and produced a small notebook, the kind with a cloth cover that she had carried for years, full of project notes and site sketches and the shorthand of a working mind. She held it for a moment without opening it. "I've been keeping a record," she said, not intentionally. "I didn't sit down one day and decide to do this." She opened it to a page near the middle. "But I started writing things down. Things you did. Things you said occasionally, but mostly things you did." She turned it so he could see. The handwriting was her usual rapid, purposeful script. "Called the contractor about the leak without being asked. February. Left my coat on the chair by the door when I forgot it. 3rd time. Did not say I looked tired even though I clearly did. Said I looked cold. Brought tea." The entries went back almost 2 years. I was trying to remind myself, she said quietly, when everything felt very far away, that this was still the person I married. Callum looked at the page for a long time. He did not trust himself to speak immediately, so he waited until he was certain. I want to fix this, he said. Not return to what it was, because what it was had these problems built into it. I mean actually rebuild, properly, with help. A therapist, real conversations, the things I've been substituting silence for. He looked at her steadily. Not because I think I can manage my way back into your trust, but because I think we're worth the actual work. She searched his face. The old habit of a person who has learned to check whether a thing is true before allowing herself to be relieved by it. Okay, she said. Not easily, not as a resolution, as a beginning. Margot reappeared in the doorway with an entirely unnecessary question about whether anyone wanted tea, confirming that she had been listening from the kitchen hallway, and they both, for the first time in what felt like a very long time, laughed. Callum drove back to Ottawa alone that night. The snow had stopped. The highway was clear and dark, and he drove it carefully, which was how he drove most things, and thought about a notebook full of small evidence that love had been present and legible all along, in a language he hadn't known to speak aloud. The therapist's name was Dr. Simão Ferreira, and his office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building near Bank Street, the kind of space that managed to feel both professional and human. Bookshelves arranged not for display but for use. A window that looked out over a courtyard where, in spring, there would be something green. Callum appreciated the practicality of it. They sat for their first session in 2 chairs at an angle to each other, not side by side, not facing directly, the geometry of conversation rather than confrontation. Dr. Ferreira was in his mid-50s, with the particular quality of attention that distinguishes a good therapist from a merely competent one. Not the performance of listening, but the actual practice of it. He asked them each, in turn, to describe not what had gone wrong, but what they had been trying to protect. Callum said, I was trying to protect her from feeling like she was the reason I sacrificed anything. I didn't want her to carry that. Adele said, I was trying to protect what was left by not putting pressure on it. I thought if I asked for more and he couldn't give it, that would be the end. Dr. Ferreira wrote something down, and then said, You were both, in different ways, protecting the other person from information that the other person desperately needed. That is not unusual. It is, in fact, one of the most common patterns I see. We mistake protection for care, and in doing so, we remove the other person's ability to actually respond to what's true. Neither of them spoke. The distance you both experienced as the other person pulling away, he continued, was both of you pulling away simultaneously, for reasons you had each decided were better kept private, and because neither of you explained, you each read the withdrawal as confirmation of what you feared most. Callum looked at his hands. He thought about 14 years of decisions made quietly, with good intentions, from a place that had never quite learned to translate itself into words. After a moment, Adele said, There's something I haven't told him yet. Dr. Ferreira waited. Adele looked at Callum. Griffin sent me a message 2 weeks ago, after the gala at City Hall. She kept her eyes on him. I blocked him immediately. I didn't respond. But I want you to know it happened, because I'm not going to have anything between us that I'm managing privately. Callum nodded. What did he say? That I was making a choice I'd regret. That I was confusing loyalty with settling. Callum was quiet for a moment, not suppressing anger. There was anger, of the steady kind which was always more durable than the explosive kind. But above it, and more present, was something he recognized as relief. She had told him, without being asked. That was not nothing. He's wrong, Callum said. About all of it. I know, she said. What I mean is, I want to say that directly, not just imply it. He's wrong about what we are, and I'm going to be more careful, from here forward, about saying things directly rather than letting them be implied and hoping they land. Dr. Ferreira said quietly, That is, in my experience, the single most important shift a couple can make. The work, as it turned out, was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It arrived in small, consistent increments, which was how Callum had always understood real work to arrive. Not in grand gestures, but in the discipline of showing up to a thing every day and doing the small, required thing. He began saying what he meant, not at length, not with formal declarations, but specifically and out loud. He told her one evening in December, while she was going over project plans at the kitchen table, that the Kingston waterfront design was the most beautiful public space he had ever stood in, and that he had never adequately said so. She had looked up at him with an expression that was difficult to read, and then looked back down at her plans and said, "I know you thought so, but it means something to hear it." "I'm going to be better at that," he said. "I know," she said. They continued seeing Dr. Ferreira weekly until March, when the sessions shifted to every other week, not because the work was finished, but because it had become, by then, something they were capable of doing between sessions rather than only during them. The architecture of their communication changed slowly. Walls came down, not by being dismantled, but by becoming unnecessary, which is the better way. Griffin Holt made one further attempt, in January, in the lobby of a professional conference at the Shaw Center. He appeared at Adele's elbow during a coffee break and said, with practiced ease, that he had been thinking about their conversations and that his offer, he used the word offer, which said everything about the nature of what he had been doing, still stood. Adele set down her coffee cup. She did not raise her voice. She did not require an audience. She simply said, clearly and without hesitation, "I think you've mistaken temporary unhappiness for a permanent vacancy. There wasn't one." She walked back to the conference room, rejoined her colleagues, and sent Callum a message during the lunch break that said, "He came to the Shaw Center. I handled it. We're fine. I'll tell you about it tonight." Callum read the message at his desk and felt something settle in his chest. The specific structural kind of settling that happens when a thing that has been under load finally finds its proper support. He typed back, "I know you did. See you at 6. I'll cook." By April, they had sold the house in Ottawa and purchased a lot in the West End. A wide, south-facing lot on a quiet street in Westboro, with old silver maples on the front and enough room to do something real. Adele had pulled out a sketchbook on the second visit to the property and begun drawing before they had even made an offer. He had stood beside her in the grass, reading over her shoulder, and said, "Can we put the kitchen at the back? I want to see the yard from the counter." And she had said that was already the plan, and he had thought quietly that this was exactly right. They designed the house together over 4 months. It was not a smooth process. They disagreed about hallway widths and the angle of the roofline, and whether the second bedroom needed a third window. They had those arguments completely and then moved past them, which turned out to be something they were capable of now that they had practice at it. Adele took 3 weeks off work when the construction began, because she could not be within range of a project this significant without being involved in the daily decisions. Callum started working from home on Fridays so they could walk the site together at lunch. The construction foreman, an older man named Réjean, who had been building houses in Ottawa for 30 years, told them once, with the bluntness of someone who had seen every variety of couple navigate this process, that they were the most collaborative clients he had ever worked with. They took this as a compliment. The house was ready in October, almost exactly 1 year after the envelope on the kitchen table. Moving day was a Saturday, gray and mild, the maples in Westboro still holding their leaves. Adele's sister came with her 2 teenagers, who were impressively useless at carrying boxes, but very good at finding the right playlist. Callum's old friend from university, a man named Dorian who had driven up from Kingston specifically for this, managed to drop a lamp and break it within the first 20 minutes, which established the tone for the day as something other than solemn. By 7 in the evening, when everyone else had gone, and the boxes were stacked in rooms that were not yet entirely themselves, Callum and Adele climbed the interior stairs to the small rooftop terrace that Adele had insisted on during the planning phase, despite the additional cost, despite the structural complexity. "I want somewhere to stand above it," she had said, and he had not entirely understood at the time, but he did now. Ottawa spread below them, the Gatineau Hills to the north, pale and dark blue in the October dusk. The Parliament buildings lit against the sky to the east, the river, just visible through the tree line, moving south. A city they had both lived in for the better part of their adult lives, looking from this specific height like something worth staying for. Adele stood at the railing with her coat open despite the cold. She had paint on her right hand from a window frame she'd helped finish that afternoon. She looked at the city for a long time. Then she looked at him. Callum stood beside her and spoke without preamble, without the performance of having prepared anything, because he hadn't. He had simply arrived at the end of a year with a few things that were true and that she deserved to hear said aloud. "I spent 14 years communicating in a language you couldn't hear," he said. "That's not an excuse. It's something I had to name clearly before I could change it." He looked at the city, the lights coming on now as the sky darkened, the specific amber of a Canadian city in October settling across the skyline. "I kept making decisions designed to protect you from difficulty, and what I was actually doing was removing you from the conversation." She was quiet. "I'm not going to do that anymore," he said. "It won't be perfect immediately. But I know the difference now between what I was doing and what this is supposed to be." Adele was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "You came to Gatineau in the snow?" "Yes, I didn't ask you to. I didn't even know I needed you to." She turned to face him. "You came anyway. That's the only version of this I know how to be," he said. "Showing up. I just need to learn to explain myself when I get there." She smiled. Not the careful, effortful smile of the last 2 years. The other one, the one that reached the corners of her eyes and stayed there a moment before it settled. "You're explaining yourself now," she said. He reached out and she took his hand, and they stood on the rooftop of the house they had built together, above the city they had both chosen, in the particular quiet of people who have been through something and are, for the first time in a long time, standing on the other side of it. Then her phone vibrated on the railing. She glanced down, a notification, an email, not a text. She picked up the phone, looked at the screen. Her expression shifted in a way that was readable, only to someone who knew her face as well as Callum knew it by now. She turned the screen so he could see. "Griffin Holt, a LinkedIn message. I heard you moved. Hope the new place brings what you were looking for. My offer stands if you ever reconsider." Callum read it once. Adele did not ask his opinion. She archived the message, blocked the contact, and set the phone face down on the railing, with the specific finality of someone closing a door that has been rattling in the wind for too long, and finally can be properly shut. She looked at Callum. "Do you want to go back in?" she said. "It's getting cold." "Not yet," he said. She leaned against him and he put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into it, which is a small thing, and also, in the context of a year like the one they had just lived, not small at all. This story carries 3 things worth keeping. The first is that silence, in a long relationship, is never neutral. Everything left unsaid is a gap the other person will fill with their best guess, and their best guess is almost always their deepest fear. Say the actual thing, plainly, before it becomes something you have to excavate. The second is that protection that excludes the other person is not really protection. Deciding what your partner can handle, what they should know, what might burden them. That is not care. That is control dressed in kindness, and it removes the person you love from their own life. Let them in. The third is this: a person who mistakes your unhappiness for an opportunity is not offering you more. They are offering you a story where you are a supporting character in someone else's ambition. The person who shows up in the snow without being asked, who sits with you in the difficult room without trying to fix it, who folds the difficult documents rather than signs them. That person is not offering you a story. They are offering you a life. There is a difference, and it is worth protecting. This story was crafted from a human heart, with gentle support from AI. Its only purpose is to remind you that the most important decisions a marriage makes are rarely the loud ones.